University here. I'm really happy that you joined us. Today, we have a really great, really useful workshop here, a hands-on workshop for local journalists around mapping New Jersey housing data. As those of you who have attended some of our previous events know, we've been talking a lot about housing data this year, and we got a lot more to go. We are joined today by the inimitable Stella Mach, who is a senior data scientist. She has more than 10 years of experience, and she is a founder of Branch 4, which is a nonprofit dedicated to supporting local journalism through data and analytics. She has special knowledge around the census data from her work on the 2020 Census Comms campaign, and she has experience helping news outlets create custom solutions for data journalism and investigative reporting support. So I won't toot your own horn any more than you can. So Stella, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your work, and take it away. But before we do that, a quick note, programming, we are recording this. We will send out the recording, the transcript, some notes, any materials or resources that Stella shares, including her slides and her contact information if you want to follow up. So stick to the end and you'll get to ask her questions, and you will receive the materials email after the recording is done processing. And with that out of the way, Stella, take it away. It's all you. Just unmute and hit it.
All right. Thanks so much, Joe. So hi, everyone. My name is Stella Mach, and as Joe said, I'm the founder of Branch 4, a new nonprofit that uses data and analytics to support local journalism. I'm really excited to be here. I recognize some of you in the crowd. I'm really excited to talk about the pressing issue of housing in New Jersey. As you all know, housing costs have risen dramatically in the past 5 years, making it really difficult for many people to buy a home or pay rent. In this webinar, we're going to see how data from the Census Bureau can answer different housing questions at the local level, and how data analysis can be used to craft stories that captivate your readers. So let me share my screen. All right, I think we're ready to roll.
Looks
good. All right, so a little about myself. Again, I'm the founder of Branch 4. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to using data and analytics to strengthen local journalism. So I have over 12 years of experience as a data scientist across a lot of different industries, dealing with all different kinds of data, analytics, and modeling. I founded Branch 4 this year because I recognize the importance of local journalism in keeping our communities informed. You know, local journalists, like you all, are so critical to the fight against really all the crazy misinformation out there. And at Branch 4, we're committed to using our data skills and our knowledge to help local journalists create original stories, to grow their audiences, and become financially sustainable. So in this webinar, we'll start with an introduction to Census Bureau data. Then we'll explore 3 housing questions at the local level using census data. So 1, how expensive is housing? 2, how affordable is housing? And 3, how many new homes have been constructed? Lastly, we'll open it up for audience questions. So many of you have probably heard about the Census Bureau from its once-a-decade population count, with the most recent census being in 2020. The Census Bureau conducts a lot of important studies and surveys in addition to the decennial census. So one of those surveys is called the American Community Survey, or ACS for short. I'll be saying ACS a lot through the webinar, which refers to this. So the ACS gathers very detailed information on a huge array of topics to gauge how US residents and households are doing. So put it simply, the ACS is really just this huge treasure trove of data for stories. The tables on this slide show the 40+ topics that the survey covers. Some example topics are, what languages people speak and where do those people live? How many children are being born? How many people receive SNAP benefits? How fast are salaries rising? And how many people are on Medicaid? So I know Medicaid has been a hot topic lately. The ACS data does have Medicaid coverage at the municipal level. The ACS releases yearly estimates at different geographic levels and sample sizes. So there's geographic levels from like the nation, state, county, and it goes all the way down even to the neighborhood level. The 5-year ACS estimates covers the most geographies and it has largest sample size. It covers, the large areas I had mentioned, but this survey specifically even goes down to the neighborhood level. Because this survey covers really small geographies, it needs a larger sample size to be able to give reliable estimates. So this 5-year estimates collects data over 60 months, and it averages out the results to get average estimates for a 5-year period. So because of this averaging, the data is a bit lagged. So for example, today is July 31st, and the most recent 5-year ACS estimates are for 2019 to 2023. So we have the 1-year and supplemental estimates. I'm sorry, is there a question?
I think we just have somebody who's unmuted by accident. We're good now. Keep it going.
Okay, thanks, Joe. So we also have, aside from the 5-year, we have the 1-year and supplemental estimates. They have more current data, but they only cover large geographies and their sample sizes are smaller. So for those that have taken a statistics class, you'll know that small sample sizes are problematic because they lead to large margins of error. The Census Bureau reports margins of error on all estimates in all surveys. So in general, when you use ACS data, you need to check that the margin of error is within an acceptable bound. So this statistical check, it's really, really important with 1-year data because the margins of error can be so large. So, I've talked about how the ACS is really this amazing source of data at the local level, and the 5-year estimates are reliable. But there is always a but. The ACS, it's not easy to navigate or understand. So because the ACS has so much data on so many geographies, it's really easy to use the wrong variable, really easy to use the wrong geographic area, and really easy to misinterpret a variable definition. So just a little context, the 2023 5-year estimates alone, they cover 800,000 geographies, and they have over 28,000 variables. So the survey is really just massive, and it takes a lot of expertise and time to navigate. Another reason why the ACS is so difficult to navigate is because the survey actually changes every year. So every year, new questions are added, some questions are removed, and some variables are slightly adjusted. These yearly changes make it really difficult to compare the same variables over time. So, with the rise of AI now, you all might be thinking, oh, I can use AI to find ACS data. Unfortunately, I've tried using AI to pull from the ACS, but it makes a lot of mistakes because the survey is just so complicated. So unfortunately, AI can't be relied on to navigate ACS data. All right, so enough of me talking about the ACS. Why don't we jump to the fun stuff? So our first question in this webinar is, how expensive is housing? So this question and the other 2 questions in the webinar can be answered in a lot of different ways. The slides will just show how I answered the question, but keep in mind there's no one single way to correctly answer the question, and there's a lot of different analysis that you can do. The 5-year ACS has a median monthly housing cost for all 564 municipalities in New Jersey. This map on the right shows the 2019 to 2023 median monthly housing cost for homeowners at the municipal level. So in a state like New Jersey, where home rule makes two neighboring towns look completely different from each other. Reporting housing data at the state or county level doesn't really cut it. Housing data at the state and county level, they're a lot easier to get, but they really overlook the complexity and diversity of the housing issue. For example, we have Chester and Morris County, which is this dark blue area right here. That has the highest median monthly cost in the whole state at $4,000. But Mount Olive, which is this area right here, has about half the monthly housing cost at $1,970. So they're both in the same county, but the housing cost, it's about half. So this nuance is really missed when we look at data for all of Morris County. The map legend up here shows the range in estimated monthly costs. The lowest is $887, and the highest is about $4,000. So $887 to $4,000, that's a huge range for a state. It means that some towns are paying 4 times more in median housing costs than other towns in the state. Looking at the map more, we see that areas with the highest cost, this dark blue shaded area here, the closer to New York City. And the rural areas in the southern part of the state, shaded in this light green, have the lowest housing cost. These trends aren't really surprising, but it's interesting to see them at a local level. All right, so now let's assume I am a local news reporter that covers suburban Vernon in Sussex County. I want to write a story about the cost of housing in the town. I look at the 5-year ACS, and I find that the estimated median monthly housing cost for homeowners was about $1,853 from 2019 to 2023. So I'd like to hear from you all now. Do you think this $1,853 monthly cost is enough data to start a housing story? Please type yes in the chat if you think it's enough, or type no if you think we need to analyze more data for a story.
Watch, that's it. And it is actually enough. And that's the end of the training. Boom, done. We got it.
It's always the surprise trainings that are the best, right? All right, you all are so smart. So the answer is no, it is not enough data. So while the data point answers the question, how expensive is housing in Vernon, it really doesn't paint a clear picture of the issue. If you have, just an 18-year-old that sees the title, median monthly housing cost is $1,853 in Vernon. They don't know if that's good or bad. They don't know how to think about that price because it's just one number. To get your audience to understand if the data point is good or bad, you need to provide comparisons. You need to think about comparisons that can be interesting. What comparisons matter and which comparisons illustrate the nuances of the issue. So in this example, I could do more analysis by looking at the median monthly housing cost of past years to see how much the cost has changed over time. Looking at costs changing over time is always a great comparison. I could also compare Vernon's cost with towns next to it, or compare the owner cost to median rent prices. There's really endless data analysis you can do because, again, ACS has so much data and there's a lot of different ways you can view the data. So I chose to compare the median cost from the prior 5-year period, the median gross rent, and compare those values to New Jersey as a whole. So the estimated median monthly housing cost for 2014 to 2018 in Vernon is about $1,630, which is about $200 lower than the 2019 to 2023 cost. For renters in Vernon, the estimated median gross rent is about $1,250 in 2014 to 2018. But in 2019 to 2023, it jumps up to $1,700 about, which is about a $400 increase. At the state level, we see that the rise in housing costs, it's more even across owners and renters. So the estimated increase for owners is about $300. And then for renters, it's about $360. So now with this data, we can start a story. So as a reporter for Vernon, with this data, I can conclude that housing costs have gone up for owners and renters, but it's risen much faster for renters. Renters still pay less for housing than homeowners, but the difference has narrowed in the past 5 years. Rising housing costs in Vernon have had a disproportionate impact on renters that isn't well reflected at the state level. So now that I have the data for a story, let me create a visual that communicates the story well. This graph shows the Vernon data in the previous slide in a way that's visually appealing and easy to understand. The visual draws your eyes to the main takeaway by highlighting the change in housing costs for owners and for renters. By placing the $220 and $437 next to each other, readers can quickly conclude that housing costs in Vernon have risen much faster for renters than for owners. In general, whenever you include a data visualization in a story, it should look nice, should be easy to understand, and most importantly, illustrate the story's main takeaway. It's not easy to create an engaging data visualization, but it's really important, especially for news outlets that publish online. Studies have shown that articles with data visualizations have more engagement and better understanding. So it's really important to create an appealing visual for your story. All right, let's go to our second question. So how affordable is housing? I think everyone's initial reaction is not affordable at all. But let's look at what the data says about this. The map on the right shows the percentage of renter households that spend 30% or more of household income on housing in 2019 to 2023. You'll see there's a lot of gray areas here. That's because I've removed towns with less than 500 rental units. So we focus on areas that have a sizable rental population. There's this 30% threshold in the ACS. I chose that 30% data on purpose because for those that are really familiar with the housing issue, you're aware of this 30% rule. The 30% rule states that you shouldn't spend over 30% of your income on housing to make sure you have enough money to spend on other important expenses like food and transportation. So 30% is an important threshold that's generally equated with housing affordability. If you're above this 30%, you could be struggling to pay for monthly expenses. So focusing on the map more, we see that a lot of renters in New Jersey are spending too much on housing. The lowest here is 20%, but it goes all the way to 82%, which is right here in Fairfield in Essex County, the purple area. So, let's pause to think about that. Rent is unaffordable for about 80% of renters in Fairfield, which is a lot. Okay. So let's assume that I'm a local reporter that covers Camden. I use the ACS to find that in 2019 to 2023, about 55% of renters in Camden spend at least 30% of income on their housing. So rent is unaffordable for about half of renters in Camden. I have this one data point, but as we remember from the first question, we need to do more analysis for our readers, understand the nuances of housing affordability. So Camden is a big city that has long struggled with affordable rental units. So as a reporter covering Camden, I'm curious how affordable it is compared to other cities. So I go back to the ACS and I get estimates for similar cities. So I get the estimates for Trenton, Patterson, Newark, and Elizabeth. I see that renter affordability in Camden, it's pretty in line with those in other cities, right? An estimated 50 to 55% of renters are struggling to pay for housing in all of these cities. So Camden doesn't really stand out relative to other cities. It's very in line. I can maybe start a story with this data, but as someone who covers Camden only, I feel like I can do more analysis. I feel like I can get my readers to understand, a deeper issue in housing here. The ACS has a lot of data, so I can go in and I can actually look at the rent affordability by race, because I know that rent affordability hits communities of color harder. So a lot of the housing data in the ACS is broken down by race. I found the number of rental units spending at least 30% of income on housing for householders that identify as Hispanic, Black, White, Asian, and other. So this graph illustrates the story of affordability well in the city. We can see that Hispanic and Black households are the overwhelming groups that are struggling to pay rent in Camden. About 4,400 Hispanic households are struggling to pay for rent. About 3,800 Black households are struggling. And when we look at other races, the numbers really just plummet. The number of white, other, and Asian households struggling to afford rent is really just a small fraction of Hispanic and Black households that are struggling. So this visual, it really brings home the point that Hispanic and Black households are largely the ones struggling to pay rent. And it really illustrates the affordability issue in Camden well. All right, so our last question for today is, how many new homes have been constructed? So this question is really important in New Jersey due to the Mount Laurel Doctrine. I think most of you know all that. I've covered housing issues. But for those who don't know it, it's a judicial ruling by the New Jersey Supreme Court that requires municipalities to use their zoning powers to have affordable homes for low and moderate income households. So under this doctrine, all municipalities are required to build affordable homes. With this doctrine, there's really already a framework for a housing piece there. If you find the right ACS estimates, you can answer these questions for a story. Is my town following the doctrine? If yes, what has made it successful? If it's not following the doctrine, why not? What has gotten in the way? So for this question, we can assume that I cover all of New Jersey, and I want to find out which towns have the highest number of new home constructions. Analyzing compliance with the doctrine, it requires me to compare the number of homes between two periods. So I dig into the ACS and I find the number of housing units in 2018 and 2023 for these 5 areas: Jersey City, Newark, East Orange, Edison, and Lakewood. Just looking at the numbers, we see there was just a substantial increase in housing units in all of these areas, especially for Jersey City. There's an estimated 27,000 more homes in Jersey City since 2018, which is really remarkable. So I dug into ACS data more and was able to get the change in housing units from 2018 and 2023 by housing unit type. So whether the unit is owner occupied or it's renter occupied. It's important to note that these numbers are not the number of new home builds, but it's the number of new housing units. So again, ACS is very technical with their definitions. New housing units includes new builds, but it also includes buildings that have been converted to like more housing units. For example, if a commercial building, it got converted to a multifamily home, or if a large estate got converted into multiple apartments. So I think the data here paints the picture of new homes a lot better. All right, we see that all 5 cities, they basically have thousands of new homes since 2018, which is awesome. Jersey City and Newark, they're really leading the way with well over 10,000 units each. And most of the new homes in the city are actually renter units, especially in Jersey City. So this data, it comes from the 1-year ACS, which is different from the 5-year ACS. So if you remember back in the Census Bureau slides, I described the difference between those two. So I have a poll question for everyone that refers to those slides. I think, Joe, if you can pull that up for me. Yes.
Just launched it.
All right. So what characteristic of the ACS 1-year estimates makes it necessary to test for data accuracy? If you kind of scroll down on the poll, you'll see these options. So A, the 1-year estimates are more current. B, the 1-year estimates cover areas with over 65,000 people. Or C, the 1-year estimates are more reliable.
Go ahead and lock your answer in now, folks. We'll keep the poll open for another 20 seconds. You will be punished for incorrect answers. Okay, last chance, last chance. Give it another 15, 20 seconds. Okay, if you're still wavering, hit that button. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ending the poll. Sharing results.
You guys are so smart.
Look at
The
that.
answer is C. Look at that. So yes, the 1-year estimates are less reliable. So we have to check the data for accuracy. So remember, the 1-year estimates sample sizes is a lot smaller. It uses 12 months of data compared to the 5-year estimates that use 60 months of data. Because the 1-year estimates are less reliable, you have to test if the estimates are statistically significant. I know that may be a big word for those that haven't taken a statistics class, but statistically significant means that the estimate is unlikely to have happened by chance. It's always good practice to test for statistical significance with 5-year ACS estimates, but for 1-year estimates, it's really an absolute must because the margins of error are a lot bigger. You can't write a story with ACS data that's not statistically significant. If the data are not statistically significant, it means you can't draw conclusions from it, and basically kind of meaning you don't really have a story. All right, so with this data, I test if the change in housing units is statistically significant at the 95% level, And it turns out that the Edison and Lakewood change, they're not statistically significant. So I have to remove them from the story. All right, so I removed Edison and Lakewood from the data. Then I created this awesome graph showing the number of new homes in Jersey City, Newark, and East Orange. So it seems like I'm done for the data analysis. I wanted to know if cities in New Jersey are following the Mount Laurel doctrine. I got the data, I added some comparisons, I tested the estimates for statistical significance, dropped estimates that were not statistically significant, and I created this great visual that tells the main takeaway well. So, can I start writing a story about these cities following the Mount Laurel doctrine? Type yes in the chat if you think I have data to say that they're following the doctrine, and type no if you think I need more data to make this conclusion. All right, you guys are so smart. So the answer is no. I think, Katrina, I think your comment is very interesting. But from a data perspective, the answer is no, because that's not what this data shows, right? So the data here, it shows the number of new homes between 2018 and 2023. It doesn't show the number of new affordable homes. So the Mount Laurel doctrine and mandates municipalities have affordable housing for low and moderate income households. This data, the number of housing units, it doesn't tell us the cost of these new homes, right? So we have that Jersey City, it has, over 22,000 rental units between 2018 and 2023. But if the gross rent of those units is like $5,000 a month, that's not very affordable, right? We need the number of new homes and their cost to conclude if a town is following the doctrine or not from a data perspective. So, you all are so smart. Most of you answered no, which is awesome. This last question, it was a bit of a trick question, I admit, but it's really a reminder of how easy it is to misuse ACS data. The data definitions, they're very technical, and you don't want to draw conclusions from the wrong data. I've been raving about how the ACS is a fantastic data source for housing and other topics like SNAP benefits, Medicaid recipients, poverty, language spoken, etc. But again, it's hard to navigate. And at Branch 4, we have the expertise to navigate the ACS and to help you create original stories. We also provide other data services to improve your readership. So our top services are here. They're data journalism, data consulting, data training, and investigative journalism support. For data journalism, we help journalists create original stories by finding data on important local issues, so like the economy, healthcare, infrastructure, and providing clear narratives and visualizations to bring that story to life. For some news outlets that have, already have the data and analysis to support a story, but maybe like an expert to verify the data before publishing, we offer data consulting, where we review the analysis, we answer data questions, and we provide technical advice. If you're, a larger newsroom, you have the staff and the data for analysis, but you'd like to train your quantitative skills. Branch 4 offers data trainings that are tailored to your staff's skill level, your pace, and your preferences. At Branch 4, we also provide investigative journalism support. So we all know that hard-hitting investigative pieces take a lot of time to produce, and many of them involve nitty-gritty data collection, data cleaning, and analysis. At Branch 4, we can do the data side of investigative work and do it much, much faster with our strong coding skills. We're talking about saving months of time to produce investigative stories so that you're able to publish them a lot faster. And all right, that's all I have, folks. Thank you all for listening to me. I hope you've learned a lot from this presentation. And I think we can open it up to audience questions now.
Excellent. I just dropped in the chat there. You beat me to it. If you have questions and you want to ask them out loud, you can use the raise hand tool at the bottom and we'll have you unmute and you can ask them, or you can drop them in the chat and Stella will read them out and then try to respond to them. If nobody has any at the moment, I certainly have a few that we can start us off. So we'll check here. Nothing in the chat right now. Does anybody want to ask a question out loud or do you want me to start? Katrina, you wanted to ask one? Go for it.
Sorry, I forgot where the raise hand function was on Zoom, so forgive me. I guess I'm curious, for Stella, if there's anything, and I don't mean this in sort of a partisan way, but just to be blunt about it, is there anything upcoming with the census data, census data with this new administration that has you concerned from sort of a data availability perspective, or any changes that journalists should know about, any caveats we should know, just because I know a lot of other data has been wiped from federal websites and, sort of research in general is under attack. So I didn't know if there's anything that we should look out for, and particularly with respect to housing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I haven't heard of any cuts the administration is planning to make. The Census Bureau, it's under the Department of Commerce. And I haven't, up until now, I haven't heard any cuts. Does that mean some cuts will happen in the future? They may, I'm not in the administration. But as of now, I haven't heard any. This data, the Census Bureau, it's really, really important for businesses like across the country. So if there were cuts, I think there'd be a lot of pushback from the business community. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah, so overall, I'm not concerned about the reliability just because I haven't heard any funding cuts. I mean, the statisticians at the Census Bureau, super smart, super dedicated to the work.
I do remember him trying to add the citizenship question, last census, and there were a lot of concerns about undercounted communities, underserved communities and stuff.
Yeah, so yeah, it was interesting because I was working at the communications team for as a contractor for the census then, so a lot of drama. So in the 2020 census, that question wasn't on there, and basically every decennial census, it's the count is very, very good. It's very, very good. I can't remember off the top of my head what how accurate the count was for the 2021, but it was very good, and I think overall people were satisfied.
We got a question from Assad. Assad, you want to ask it out loud or you want me to read it in the chat?
Sure, I can ask it out loud. I wanted to ask, with looking at like the rent increase or the increase in the cost of living or the cost of housing over the years, how can we account for inflation so that, if we're saying like it's $400 more from,
Mhm,
2025 since 2021,
mhm,
that sounds like a lot, but then if we kind of think about inflation and the fact that, maybe everything's getting more expensive, maybe the minimum wage has gone up as well.
mhm,
So how do we account for that as well?
mhm. Yeah, that's a really great question. So with CPI, so inflation's increased year over year about 2%, but 2.7% actually year over year. But in general, we know that housing's increasing faster than like the headline CPI. Um, so for a story, that is something you can include, right? You can say, here's how much overall costs have increased over, the past 5 years. And then you compare it to the amount of increase for like renters and owners. What you can also do is you can adjust, this is more of like a math adjustment, but you can adjust the dollars to like, 2025 dollars, right? To account for inflation there. So, you have that, the price you're seeing for for 2014 to 2018, that's actually $2025. So that'll account for inflation. It's kind of both of those options. Thank you. I think, where is it? Virginia had a question.
Virginia, yeah. Virginia, you want to ask it out loud, or you want us to?
I can ask it out loud. So in past decades, Verona has had a problem with redlining. We're not the only town in New Jersey. Our median home prices have risen substantially. So is there a way to use the ACS data to see if redlining is still an issue here?
I mean, I think it's so funny because redlining, it's such a huge topic, and I know it affects a lot of different communities.
Yeah.
Not only New Jersey, it affects here in Mass. It's really,
Yeah.
really bad problem in Mass. But I think for specific questions of redlining, I think there are, right? Because like redlining, I mean, it's an issue that's happened over decades, right? So it's hard for like answer it fully. But I think you've had a question like, these, I don't know, these two towns, one of them was redlined really badly so that, there wasn't much development, there wasn't much economic business activity there. And while the town next to it, it wasn't redlined, are there still differences between those towns today, right? Like you can look at the income, education level, housing prices, things like that, to see if there really is a big difference between those two towns, and we can do statistical tests to see if that difference is significant. So I think that's one way to answer it. There's probably other ways with the ACS data. So if you're interested in exploring that, I mean, we can definitely chat offline to talk about that more.
Because we sort of got looped into what's his name, Rothstein's book from about a decade ago, The Color of Law.
Yes.
Yeah, so Verona made it into that book in not terribly favorable terms. We've been good with meeting our affordable housing obligations, but as I said, the median home prices have risen substantially. So it's all kind of balled up together, all these real estate issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different analysis you can do, right, between certain towns that are redlined and we're not, and seeing, if there really is, still a huge difference between those.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Anybody else? Anybody else? I'll go. We talked about gathering the data, making sure that it's valid and verifying and all that stuff. You talked briefly about that first example you showed of that back-to-back bar chart. I don't know if there's a technical term for it, but I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your approach to data visualization when it's necessary. There's a tendency, especially like you said, with a lot of the AI tools that can whip up a dashboard, in a minute or two, to always default to visualization, or maybe stay away from visualization. I wonder if you could talk us through your thinking on when visualization is appropriate and useful, and what types of visualization, but not just what types, like what's the logic behind particular types of visualizations, when you're trying to get a point across that the numbers themselves just won't cut it. Long ass questions.
Yeah, it's funny. I always like data visualizations, just as a default, because especially if a topic is complex, the data visualization, it just simplifies the understanding of it, right? I mean, it's a lot easier for someone to understand a visual than for them to read, 4 paragraphs without an issue. So I would think, even for, other jobs I've had, I always include data visualizations. In terms of, I guess, how to make them engaging, I feel like this one's more of like an art. You do it for a lot of years and you get good at it, right? I think what you really want is that the reader can take away the main point from it. They're able to look at it and understand like what you're trying to say here. So it requires a lot of time to actually just play around with it, right? Like for that one graph you were talking about, Joe, I played around with like 10 different iterations of it. And then, just playing around with it to see if it looks nice, if it makes sense, if I can adjust it a bit more so that it's more understandable.
Excellent. Thank you. Katrina's got another question. What test did you do with respect to statistical significance with the housing units example? Great question. Sounds very math heavy.
Yeah, it's hypothesis testing. So for those that are taking a statistics class, you're basically testing if the null hypothesis can be rejected or not. And you do that. I mean, there's like a formula to do it. But you basically want to test if like the change in the number of units, if that actually happened by chance, or that value is actually, if it's like meaningful. And so in the formula, you look at like the margin of error, which is like standard deviation, and then the difference between the two, and there's a calculation for it. I don't want to go too much in detail, but if you're interested, we can talk offline, and then I can give you a formula if you'd like. Okay, awesome. All right.
Hi, I have a question. This is Jordan Cole here. Sorry, I'm like in the middle of like the kitchen, so I don't want to like turn on the camera. But one quick no, because I'm just curious to know like how much of like real page, I know, like these rent like algorithmic, and I know it's like more of a rent fixed poised question, but like how much of that was taken into account, like rent fixing like algorithmic softwares, or because I know the ACS like produces like these community. I was looking at the data sets themselves, and but yeah, I was just wondering like how much of that, if any, right, if any, if it takes into account, since your presentation was like on like affordability and rent housing. So I was curious to know if to see if that was taken into account in any like real page. Long ass question as well. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So are you asking if, so I know there's, I've heard of these algorithms that they basically set rent prices, right? So that's just how the market for rent seems to be determined for a lot of it. So is that your question, like how?
Right. Yeah. So I guess the question would be more if this ACS study like takes that into account, like the real pie, when it comes to like rent price fixing algorithms, like algorithms.
So I would say that, I mean, there's a lot of things that determine rent prices, right? Obviously, there's supply and demand component, and this algorithm, it's part of it, right? I mean, I haven't looked too much in the studies for it, but if it's pushing rent prices high and renters are paying that price, then that's being reflected in the survey. It's I mean, I think there's the algorithms, there's like a lot of distortion they do in the market, if they really are pushing the rent prices up. But if renters are signing contracts based off of these algorithm prices, then that's what's being recorded in the ACS. Because the ACS, they send out surveys. They send out like 3.5 million surveys every month to people. And it asks them, a lot of questions. One of them is, what's the rent price that you pay? And if that's the price they paid based off of the algorithm, then it is being recorded in there.
Mm. No, thank you for that, because I was like looking at the 5 year, like the ACS. I think it was like the percentage that was put there was at least spent 30% in like household income. So I was just like thinking, like I covered the state of New Jersey. I work with on J Urban News, but it's like I've covered specifically in Jersey City, like kind of how rent prices go up like 30-40% rental increases. And then I'm like a lot of this like has to be filed, I believe, under the Department of um I'm forgetting the Department of in their housing. Um but yeah, so I was just curious to see like what RealPage has been such a huge topic here because of the price fixing algorithms and how much of that is actually reflected in like the medium, like like the actual
Yeah.
the actual, like stat of that.
Yeah, I feel like that's more of like an economic analysis, right? Because you're analyzing the market itself. Because, well, I have a background in economics. I think I can talk a bit about this too. But I mean, it depends on like, again, it's kind of the supply and demand, right? If you have, if you have most rental companies, they're using this algorithm, and that's basically setting the price of apartments. And if there's not enough competition that aren't using the algorithm to push it down, then to lower the price, then that's basically price fixing. But again, it requires a very detailed market analysis, which I'm not entitled to give here.
No,
I'm happy to chat with you offline more about
yeah,
it.
no, thank you for the insights. I know that question was it's more of a rent, I guess, like more of a housing, but like I've reviewed a couple of like indexes myself and just seeing, like figuring out RealPage and how they have to report these data sets, but does it, does it truly reflect of what the market's indicative of, So but yeah, that's but yeah, thank you again for that. Appreciate it.
I think Assad had a question. So Assad, I don't know if you want to ask it or I can just read it now.
I can ask it. I was just wondering, like, after doing a data analysis, kind of like, I know you probably have, really kind of refined ways of doing it but for people who have kind of a more basic understanding of data and data journalism, like what are some ways we can make sure, the analysis we're doing is accurate?
Yeah, I know Dave Scheingold is on this call, so I don't know if you want to also chime in. I'd be happy to hear what you have to say. But I think especially for stories, I would say like you have to verify like for any data analysis, right? Whether it's from the ACS or not. Like if you find something at like the state website, or if you find something on like the FCC website, like try to find somewhere else that verifies the data, that it's, it looks in line with that. If you report, if you have data for a story, but it turned out to be wrong, obviously there's reputational harm in that. So I think that's a big thing. Another thing is, within the data you have, you kind of do like sanity checks, right? Like if you're doing percentages and they're supposed to add up to 100%, then, check that it adds to 100%. If you think they have to be greater than, I don't know, 10, then like check they have to be greater than 10. So it's kind of these like little checks that you have to do with your data set, depending on what it is, at least that I would do. I don't know if Dave wants to chime in. Like
I would also just add collaboration, talk to other journalists and find a quant, absolutely. And the center's more than happy to put you in touch with data journalists who might be able to work with you. Dave, don't be shy. Come on. Professor Dave.
He is Professor Dave.
That's right.
I'm sorry, I was away from the computer. What was the question?
We put you on the spot there. We're talking about validating the accuracy of our data analysis. Stella, you want to bring him up to speed?
Yeah, Sal's question was like, what are different ways to test the accuracy of the data analysis? I mean, I named two things. One is, there's other data sources, try to verify that those numbers look in line. Another thing is kind of check within the data, right? Like if you think if you think things are supposed to sum to 100%, check that it sums to 100%. You know, if it's supposed to be greater than 0, check that it's greater than 0. I don't know if you had other tips, Dave.
Well, for sure, sample sizes, you want to check that, margins of error. And when you do your analysis, if something pops up as weird or too good to be true, it probably is. And obviously run your results past experts and people who know more than you do. And in addition, of course, just double and triple checking your work. But as far as the validity of data, do your research on how the data is collected, where it comes from. Is it full 100% sample? Is it just surveys? And if you have everything, say you're doing a housing story and you have every home sale in a community, well, that's pretty good. You got it all. If you don't, if you're using something like the ACS, look at your margins of error. Personally, for me, it would depend on how much I was using the data. If you're using it for maybe more general descriptions or some foundational elements for your story, you can probably go a little looser. If you're building your data, if you're building your story around some data, you want to be really careful with it. I know for myself, once a margin of error started to get over just around 15%, I'd get a little concerned. Maybe there was a couple of statistician friends that I had who were smarter than me about this stuff, and I'd say, I'm using these margins of error. Am I really taking too much of a risk here or not? Don't depend just on yourself. That was just kind of my general rule of thumb. When I was working with census data, if I'm seeing more than a 15% margin of error, I'm kind of looking at the data and see how wide that is. And making a judgment call journalistically with your editor, who hopefully has something more than a small brain, and experts on the subject, for sure. It does really depend on your data source. If you're drawing a data source that's literally every single incident or every single example, well, you're doing pretty well there. Also, in addition, look at the documentation of the data, see where there are potential flaws in it, flags for data that you shouldn't use or you should have great caution with. Like you're doing housing stuff, if you're going to do housing home price analysis and you have data on all of the home sales, well, look in there and see which ones are flagged as not representing, say, market value or true market value, and do with that as you wish, but in that case, you probably kick them out. Certainly look within a data set and look for columns that would suggest potential problems with the data and be real careful with it. Do not just dive into a data set, analyze it and go, yay, look what I found. Because the egg that you will wipe off your face will require many washcloths. So just be real careful with that when you work with data. I've probably said more than you wanted me to here, but those are some of the key things. Definitely check your source, check your margins of error, check how they're collecting the data, and look for flags in the data that would show that maybe some element of the data was not collected quite like the others, or if they simply cite issues with the data, or maybe they even suggest don't use this at all. There's heavy lifting in front of every data analysis. I mean, it is what it is. It's not just pushing buttons like you see in the movies. Was that what you were looking for?
Yeah, that's all really helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
We are at the top of the hour, and I want to respect everybody's time. Hell yeah to all of you who stayed on to the very end, which I think is pretty much everyone. And good news for all of you as well. Stella's going to come back for another in-depth data training, but this one's going to focus on Medicaid data. Weirdly, completely not topical or timely. No idea why we might be doing that. Look for details on that upcoming webinar. It'll probably be a little later in the summer, maybe September. We're still working out the dates. And then, of course, look for the recording and materials email that comes from me. Stella, thank you so much. This is fantastic. You are a wealth of knowledge, and we're looking forward to having you back.